Very warm welcome to Lauri Ruhala from Finland. Hello.
Hello, hello.
Thanks for being with us. We want to talk about how to measure field readiness. And you are in a special position because, first of all, you are a high performer in your company for sales. Then you are the CEO at the same time. Means you have to enable others. And then you still have a product to enable and to measure the field readiness. So three different spots where you have to deal with the topic we want to talk about today. And this is why I'm curious. How do you enable people and how do you measure if it's working or not?
That's a great question and great to be here. Um, yeah, I mean, you already mentioned three separate things there: being a salesperson, being a CEO, and then helping people also at the same time with field readiness and sales enablement, helping our customers with that. So it's kind of like a three-pronged approach into the same topic. But yeah, I mean, being a founder of a company, you're most likely the first person to try and find out what your sales message should be. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. And founders like me, there's a lot out there, tend to be people who are willing to try lots of different directions and different ways of selling what you're doing. And that actually can become an issue when you start hiring people and when you start building a sales team, because you need to unify and find one way to sell it so that you can replicate and build a sales team. Actually, if you end up hiring an army of clones, you end up basically, in my case, you end up just distorting the message, because then you'll have many people trying different messages. So to build field readiness, first of all, you have to have a unified message, I think. Then how do you measure that becomes really important. I believe, of course, it's possible to measure field readiness from the most basic standpoint, which is, following how your sales activities are going. Are we going from to next stages in opportunities? How's the pipeline doing? But that's very old school, and at this moment in 2021, it's an old school thing already. So I think it's more about measuring, are we actually on message? So what we do, for example, is we do some of the maybe the basics. So to measure, to even have a unified message, we have unified sales content. We try to train each other constantly. If we have meetings weekly with the sales team to discuss how specific cases and try to do that. But then to measure it, we actually measure what content we present. We measure what topics are mentioned in sales discussions, and this means that we try to measure: are we focused? We're a software company, so are we focused only on feature? Are we demoing too much, or are we discussing value enough? Are we building the
How do you
cases
figure
correctly?
out that you're demoing too much, for example, or do you that you talk too much about features, or how do you measure that? How do you get the number to see it's too much?
Well, Florian, you're putting me in an awkward position because I might have to pitch our product here a little bit, but
Go for it. Go for it.
but so I run a company called SalesFrame, and SalesFrame is also the name of our application. And what it does is it's basically a presenting and content management tool for salespeople. So the idea is that you have your unified content in one place. The content can be anything. So it doesn't have to be PowerPoints. It can be software. It can be Excels. It can be websites, etc. And all of that can be presented from one place. And this allows us to also gather analytics on what's happening when you're presenting. So we know if we demo 25 minutes in a 60-minute meeting, for example. It's not an exact science. Sometimes if you demoed for the whole 60 minutes, it might still be absolutely positive. But in many cases, when you see that you've had a lot of sales conversations revolving around a demo, the results aren't as good as if you've compared to situations where you've been able to go through need assessment and you've been able to discuss value, etc. And I strongly believe that even in online meetings, it is important to show content. It's also very important to not show content all the time, but it's important to show content because it still matters that people connect images to arguments made, kind of like we would with a whiteboard or a chalkboard. So it's still important to present. And if we're presenting value content, if we're presenting value argumentation, etc., that's a good sign, and it usually also leads to better cases. So that's what we try to do. We actually use our own tool. We look at our own analytics quite a lot on a weekly basis, and we try to see that does every salesperson's analytics look similar to each other, or are there differences? And that's not always the case. There might be months or even quarters where some of my colleagues who are doing the same job from a sales perspective have very different statistics than, for example, I do.
That's an interesting point, because a lot of times we measure the high performers and say to the others, do the same. Just have the same behaviors, the same activities, and you will succeed. Can you do that?
You can, but I think there's also a trap in just measuring the high performers' activities in the sense that, or what I mean is, if you take just their analytics and what slides they present, you still have to understand how they brought those up. So what we actually tried to do is we go over, regardless of whether you're a high performer or not, we're looking at smaller things. So like, just did somebody figure out, whether it was before when preparing for a conversation or during a conversation, did they figure out something new? It might be that they're the lowest performer, but for one specific thing, for explaining something, for example, they might have actually figured it out better. So we're trying to look at smaller steps than that. But of course, in general, high performers, in the larger process, that can be something that you should try to, get to the whole organization.
If I understood you right, the product you're offering is measuring how good or often or not often the content of your sales messages are used or is used. So you're going really into the detailed quality or content of a conversation, negotiation,
Correct.
sales process, and measure how is it used or not.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
So I'll give you a couple examples. So we have clients in very different fields. We have clients who have sales processes that last years, 5 years even. So imagine you're selling a large industrial automation, or even a whole, factory, for example, or building a whole factory. That process is huge. There's a million different things you have to go over. But at the end of the day, it's really important to be able to access content related to different topics in that sector. But at the other end, we've got insurance companies selling B2C, or we've got breweries pitching their new beers to supermarkets, for example. And that's a very, day-by-day quick job. And when it comes to the measuring part, with the breweries, for example, it's as simple as you might have a campaign for summer drinks. So on a very simple level, you might just want to know, did our sales reps, there might be hundreds of them, did they bring this up enough to the supermarket managers? Because we want those supermarkets to order that now. And if you're just following purchasing, and if you're following invoicing, you're going to be late. So you want to be preemptive, because the orders might come in weeks after the discussions.
Okay.
So that's one thing that, from a very quick perspective, you can measure already that, are we actually talking about what we're supposed to be talking about? But then going deeper, when you use the example of a long sales process and a complex sales process, especially, I think, considering the countries we're from, we're both very familiar with very technical sales. I think one of the biggest mistakes is that, people focus on technical parts too much and functionality too much, even if we're not talking software, but anything technical. And measuring, do they talk about the value? And that's what we're trying to do.
But how do you measure and how do you see that, for example, I'm using I'm the brewery now, and it's easy for me because I'm from Bavaria, so I can relate to that a lot.
All right.
And I'm having the summer drink,
Yeah.
and I'm using this campaign now to execute, and I'm using this stuff. There are people using it a lot, and there are people not using it at all. But how do you rate that maybe somebody in winter times is buying the stuff because of this campaign right before? So I got the message to say I'm measuring how often is the content used,
Hmm.
but can you also see is the content at the end really successful on the customer side? Because
Yes, you
I
can.
can spread a lot of documents, of course, but if they are really bad, I will not make a shot.
Well, first of all, on a simple level, we do one of our actually our most actively used feature is the sending of material to customers.
Mhm.
So if you're a Bavarian brewery and you're a sales guy for them, after you meet your supermarket manager, for example, you would send them the materials via sales frame, and then you can uh, you as a salesperson will be able to see when they open it, but you'll
Mhm.
also be able to see what they're reading. So are they reading the information about the summer beer? Are they just reading some normal,
Mhm.
regular offering material? And
Mhm.
this analytics obviously is fed back to management as well. So
Mhm.
in the long run, you can look at customer specific analytics or just, how is our whole customer base doing?
Mhm.
That are they actually looking at the stuff also that we're supposed to be sending them? And here's a little difference to, let's say, marketing automation, where you're also tracking similar things on your website, because this is content sent based on one-to-one discussions with your salespeople,
Mhm.
and that is a very different type of level of communication than you would have if you're just talking about your website, for example.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you can measure that first of all, but secondly, we do connect with CRMs. We're not a CRM ourselves, but we connect with CRMs so that you actually get the connection of was it a success or not? Did we close
Mhm.
the deal or not?
Mhm.
Or did the deal even just progress? Because
Mhm.
sometimes, like in the long version, in the 5-year sales process version, success sometimes inside 1 year is just going from a lead stage to an opportunity stage.
Mhm. 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 So it could be really slow, and then it's hard to measure simply the sales stages because every product and every industry has completely different sales cycles,
Yeah.
and sometimes you would only create in your example only one plus sales stage in a year, so you cannot really measure a lot or in fine tuning what happens or if it's successful or not, and
Yeah.
probably if you have such long term sales processes or sales cycles,
Mm.
it's hard to see in year one if you do something wrong, but in year five you will see it probably, but you can't go back in time. You lost the 5 years, and this is what I heard a lot from colleagues talking about the fast lose.
Mm.
Find the fast lose because otherwise you spend too much time in a different or in the wrong direction, and you could use this time already for better outcomes. Yeah.
I actually, when we're talking about fast losing, or I use the term failing fast.
Hmm.
Um, that's something we try to drum into our sales team, because we're a growing startup. We don't have time to have opportunities that are hanging and we're wasting meetings on them, endlessly, because
Hmm.
customers will talk to you if nothing else for free consulting.
Hmm.
And how do you how do you avoid having to just giving free consulting as sales, or sales as free consulting? So everything should be driven. I guess a lot of people say this, but everything should be driven to getting a no in many ways.
Hmm. Hmm.
Of course, you're trying to get a yes, but uh,
You
you
learn with the
want
nose.
red or green light. You don't
Hmm.
want yellow light. You
Hmm.
don't want to be stuck in that cycle of I'll call you back, I'll call you back. Are you ready yet? Are you ready yet?
Hmm. Hmm.
And we do help there a little bit ourselves, because when you send materials over, be they offers or technical information, and then you see maybe 6 months later that the customer is now reading it, that helps you get, understand that okay, the customer might be ready now, instead of having to call them every 2 weeks, for example. But definitely, to go back to your point, it's really, really important to just focus on,
Yeah.
cases that matter, cases where there's a chance, and not get in that cycle.
It's exactly my experience. The failing stories you learn way more about in comparison to stories that are success stories, because with success stories, you never know why they succeeded. With fail stories, most of the time, you know what was the failure and what was the mistake or the misunderstanding sometimes. So you can really learn from it and get better. You mentioned this already at the beginning of our conversation. When you really started, and you tried yourself a lot of different ways of selling, and then it got complicated because you onboarded new people, and you have to avoid that they also try different things, and then you have a lot of chaos. Some of my guests recently also told me absolutely the same thing. You need to align the message from the company side first to be able to measure it at
Yes.
the end. So
Yes.
you align with a one story, with an individual story, and this story you test and try with the customers, and then you get feedback and modify it. But it is very important that not a lot of people are getting a lot of different stories. Can you also measure with your software, for example, or also in your company? That a document is not the best one. It doesn't matter if it's a video or a PDF or slides from PowerPoint, whatever. So that you say, okay, we were running this campaign with this summer drink, but it wasn't successful, and it maybe wasn't successful because. Can you answer that?
That's a tougher one for us from a technical perspective. And without going into a really, really long answer, we try to stay away from the data that CRM handles. We don't want to compete in that market. So that means we don't know what win-loss, as I mentioned earlier. So sometimes it's hard for us to quantify whether a content was the reason for success or for failing, because the data is in the CRM. This is in cases where we're not connected to the CRM. There's plenty of customers who want this tool, for example, without that connection. So sometimes it's more difficult to pinpoint that from analytics. But now I mean, you can't solve everything with technology. I would love to say that as a startup CEO, but it's what we're at the end of the day selling. What pretty much any software company is selling is just a way to handle a process, but you could do those processes without those specific tools as well. Just requires a lot more discipline. So even on our end, it requires process. The weekly meetings are there. Our Monday meeting is about talking what's happening this week, but Friday meetings are about what did we learn this week. And so the Friday meetings are about understanding why certain content doesn't perform, or why we're having trouble discussing certain things, and that combined with the understanding how much things are used, etc., is what we use to develop new content. It's a constant process. You're trying to improve. So, but of course, to begin that, you need to have some kind of unification. So,
Absolutely,
some unified message.
Agreed on that, absolutely. What I hear there is your enablement, or the enablement you're doing in your company, is a lot also based on sharing experiences
Absolutely.
with all team members. So everybody shares with everybody, so that everybody can learn from failure or success.
Well, I mean, actually, something that you said before the last question, I can't remember exactly, but you were discussing, like not knowing why we won, or not knowing necessarily why we lost. I think actually it's just as important to understand both. I know this is not massive insight, but it's really, really important to interview both cases, won or loss, and even years after sometimes. Maybe, years later it's better to understand, but I think a lot of sales organizations and a lot of enablement or field sales readiness organizations fail at the interview part, because they ask, why did you not buy? Or they ask, why did you not buy? Or or they ask both. So it's actually an art to interview well in those situations. You need, like, even if you've won cases, what were the problems you were trying to solve? What were the things that happened internally in your company that led you to make this decision? Or what were, you need to ask around the issue. Because if you ask a current customer, why did you buy? They might not tell you the right answer. They'll tell you what your sales pitch was. They'll tell you gave them 3 arguments. They'll remember those arguments now because they are a customer, so they'll answer those. But actually, it might be a completely different reason that you never understood, because it might be internal politics. It might be just some circumstances that weren't really related to you.
So it's harder. You think it's harder to find out why somebody bought a product or application or service than finding out why they did not, because probably
sometimes because now you're it's like in a relationship, with a partner. It's sometimes it's easier to discuss what the problems were once you haven't been together for a while. So because both have a clear head. So when you're in that relationship with a customer, you want to make sure everybody's happy. Even the customer wants to make sure the relationship with you is good. Hopefully, I know there are cases where customers don't want to do that, but so there's a bit more diplomacy going on when you're interviewing a current customer. But still, it's good to and of course, there's like for us. Again, as a startup, trying to find what our message should be, we're still doing this. I'm not saying we've solved this, but you need to find out what your message should be. You need to interview the cases who are your current customers, but maybe they're not the most active. Maybe they're not the most satisfied. But you also need to really need to interview the ones who really love it, because maybe they found a way to use whatever you're offering or benefit from whatever you're offering. And the reason why they're benefiting from that is actually different than your sales message. And maybe that actually should be your sales message. So I think the whole journey of field readiness and sales enablement, etc., kind of starts from there, that you understand, try to understand at least, then unify that into one message, then start measuring or applying it to your team and measuring that.
I like the point to measure the content, like we started this conversation already, because it's not only showing that content is useful, it's showing from the customer side they're using it even maybe 2 months later, like you told me, and giving me some hints and tips when to call the customer, when to get in touch again. Even maybe already a lost customer could come back by that. So it shows me a lot. At the same time, I can see also activity. So I can see also when content is used by my people, I see automatically a kind of activity level. And it's not like something similar like we had in former times with the call time, So we are measured, sales is measured by call time. And of course, what happened was that everybody started to calling the families and relatives, And you have a lot of call time, but it's not the content that is the right one. But with measuring the content behind it, it doesn't matter how long the call is it's 10 minutes or 100 minutes. But if they use the content XYZ in it, I can see, okay, they were talking on a quality basis about what they should have talked about. So it gives me a lot of insights, even if this is not a clear number, but at least it gives me an insight on, yes, we're doing right or not. Yes, maybe we have a marketing department that produces a lot of slideshows and only 10% of them are used. So you can reduce this effort, At the same time, you can see, do the salespeople have everything? And you can track down the customer. And this is very important for me, because to see the customer reacting with my stuff is, especially while Corona happens at the moment, very important to me, because if I see prospecting, for example, if somebody wants to prospect me, I'm in meetings like now for the whole day. To reach out to me is really hard.
At
the end of the day, I have 7 to 10 people to call back, and I'm probably not making all of them.
Exactly.
That's the point. So the only way to reach out to me with a special topic where I really have to focus on and not saying, hey, how are you, is the on-demand way. Is the way that you send me something where I can have on Sunday night when I have some time and Netflix is over already, I jump in and say, let's see what they send me, And that's a really powerful thing. It's not about controlling or monitoring down or finding measurements. It's more about a tool helps me to sell in these times especially, and especially find the right time when to talk about something. And this
But
is why
this
it's
is
very,
why
very
this
powerful.
this topic that we're talking about right now has been so important during COVID, because I think, yeah, I mean, everybody's being a really, really insightful consultant during COVID, because there's a million insights to be had about the shift to online meetings, etc. But I think one of the biggest shifts that organizations have had is just the lack of unity in message. So, because suddenly you're not at the office every day, even if obviously you go to customer meetings, probably at the customer quite often, but you're not at the office every day. There is no water cooler chit chat about what happened in your meetings, or in your customer discussions. So suddenly everything in some ways falls apart, because you just have to blindly trust that your sales would do the right thing. Yes, you do see in your CRM that they're still talking, they're having meetings, and whatever they manually write into meeting reports, which very few salespeople actually properly do. So suddenly, having anything that unifies that becomes really important. But I mean, you touched on something really interesting there with the prospecting part as well, or just the communication part. Like, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and in Finland last spring, daycares were locked down. Thankfully, they're not right now. Thankfully, they're open so I can work. But I would spend half the day, when my wife was working herself, I would spend half the day with my daughter, let's say in the park or something like that, in the forest. So of course, I'd still get tons of emails. So imagine being at that sandbox, making a sandcastle, and then getting an email that is 10 screens long on my cell phone from somebody trying to book a meeting with me. I'm not even going to read past the first sentence, because I just look at the amount of screens
Yeah, and
on
you're
my
just
phone,
fed
and
up already.
exactly. So, that's like number one thing for people to understand. But the second thing is that, like from our perspective, we're able to send the link to content. We're able to personalize a video greeting to you. So then, for me, for example, if I got a video greeting at the sandbox, somebody just telling me for 60 seconds that, hey, Lauri, we should meet because of this and this, I could still look at my daughter, pay attention to what she's doing, but have my phone there in my hand, kind of just listening to whoever this is, talking to me. So, and it felt more of a personal connection there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, there's just so many things that you have to take into account here.
Perfect. This was a lot interesting to me, and it helped
I
me a
feel like
lot.
we've been jumping around.
Yeah, we covered a lot of different topics, and it was nice because we covered really the different personas or stakeholders in that. The CEO, the founder, the sales themselves, and the customer, and all of them are involved into the whole process. And as you said once in our conversation, we have to look at all of them. It's not only how performing is one of them and
Yeah.
how much activity is there, because there can be a lot of activity, but it's not smart.
Yeah.
And especially as the founder, and especially in a startup, you cannot, as you said, you cannot afford it to waste a lot of time. You
Exactly.
need to have the, how you call it, the fast failure, and the fast
Failing
lose,
fast, yeah.
to see or to spend your time more worthy on different and other topics. Yeah, absolutely. Lauri, thanks a lot for the conversation.
Thank you.
Looking forward. Stay healthy over there.
You too.
And yes, the Bavarian needs to visit Finland once. That's very important. So it's on my bucket list.
Well, you're welcome. I'll warm up the sauna.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Great. See you later.